welcome. I'm so pleased to introduce you to my friend, Aarti Shahani. Arthi is an award-winning journalist and author. She started her career as an immigration and criminal justice organizer, and she pivoted to business journalism, quickly becoming one of NPR's rising stars. Her memoir, Here We Are, American Dreams, American Nightmares, is being released in paperback this month. I have a hard copy, but if you want an autographed paperback, go to Arthi's website, that's arthishahani.com, and you can get an autographed copy sent to wherever you are. The book chronicles Arthi's journey from being an undocumented kid in Queens to a national voice on the front lines of tech reporting. Arthi's gotten full scholarships to attend America's top schools, starting with the prep school Brearley on Manhattan's Upper East Side, and ending at Harvard, where she got her master's at the Kennedy School of Government. Arthi is joining us from her home in Oakland. Welcome, Arthi.
Hey, it's great to be here.
So I have some questions for you, and then we'll be opening up the conversation to audience questions. So those of us listening in, if you have any questions, please let us know, and we'll make sure to ask. For the people in the audience who have not read your coming-of-age journey just yet, I'm going to give a tour of the pit stops. First, a ritzy all-girls prep school in Manhattan, a crime syndicate, Rikers jail, Harvard, an international kidnapping, the September 11th terrorist attacks, the creation of ICE, and a confrontation with a judge who upended your family's life. This is all a real story. Arthi, can you tell us the story of your family's immigration and what happened to your father and your uncle?
No, absolutely. And, Brenda, thank you for hosting this. I'm happy to be talking about it with a girlfriend and your colleagues, okay? So in broad brushstrokes, if you've heard my voice before, I like to joke, and this is not an official NPR job description, but it's kind of like America's favorite Indian IT lady. That's the role I played for a very long time in journalism, delivering breaking news on multiple companies, including this one, Google, talking about artificial intelligence, disinformation, possible monopolies and duopolies, very important stuff. I realized there was something happening in the process of my journalism. A lot of my sources, people would assume, oh, you sound a certain way, you're doing a certain thing. It must mean that your parents were engineers or doctors and you had a certain kind of upbringing. And I think that for a lot of us immigrants, we go through an intensely working class experience in our family's campaign to make this country our home. It's by no means handed to us, and we see a lot in the process. But if and when we've made it, there's this tendency to whitewash our past. And I didn't want that. I wanted my country. I wanted you. I wanted the audience to know, actually, this woman who made it, she saw a litany of things, including the arrest of her father. In broad brushstrokes, because I'm just going to assume people haven't really read the book yet. I hope you change that. My family came here when I was a baby. I was not born here. And we overstayed tourist visas. We were undocumented. And then the way that we got our papers was through a process that is now derided as chain migration. And I have to say, Brenda, it strikes me as so funny because the first time I heard the term chain migration, I thought it was a positive thing, because what my ear heard was like, oh, each family member is a link in the chain, and you add links and your family grows bigger and stronger. Don't we want big, strong families in this country? And so I think that part of my need to write this book is to reclaim the migrant narrative, because what for many of us is literally the most heroic, boldest thing we've done has now been somehow subverted into like a villainous act. So my family, we got our papers. We thought it was a straight shot to the American dream. This may come as no surprise to you. I was a mouthy know-it-all kid. I got a scholarship to a very fancy private school on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. It's called the Brearley School. To give you a sense, as you already said, of what it costs, it's literally a Tesla a year to attend. And I got there when I had no idea people could be that rich. And I started learning all these words I didn't know before in terms: country house, Can you believe it? A home that is not your first home. I had no idea. Okay. PhD, CEO. I didn't know these terms. My childhood aspiration was to be a prosecutor. In part, it's because I like to argue. In part, it's because it's what I saw on TV as a respectable career for a mission-driven person who wants to help her community. I had the feeling as a preteen going into this school as a scholarship kid that my parents weren't enough. And this is like a really interesting sort of part of the migrant journey, is that your parents bring you here because they want a better life for you. And then you start to act better than them. And they're like, what, you think you're better than me? You know, like that thing totally happens. It absolutely happened in my case. Frankly speaking, I felt ashamed of my parents. I felt they weren't enough. Their English wasn't good enough. Never mind, they spoke 6 other languages as working class migrants who traveled the world. And as I was pursuing this sort of path of elite prep school on to God knows what might come next, my father was building his dream. He was starting a wholesale electronics store on the very same block where he sold watches and calculators, on the very same block where he used to shovel snow for $5 an hour. So literally, Dad went from shoveling that snow to a decade later running a store. He was really proud of it. I wish, when I think back at it, I wish I had been more proud of it. And one day, law enforcement came in and they arrested my father and uncle. And they said that the men in my family were basically participating with the Cali drug cartel of Colombia to help their drug trafficking by selling them watches and calculators and cleaning their dirty money. And that's really where my story takes off. So, you know, the Indian IT lady talking about the big and powerful in Silicon Valley, the defining childhood experience for me was actually not tinkering in a garage. It was going to courts. It was going to Rikers Island jail. And it was seeing basically a prosecution case actually unfold in real time. And I have to say that, you know, this is something I really hope people can get as they read my book, Here We Are, or others that talk about the justice system in America. I mean, it's broken. I know the first time I came to court, again, the feeling I had was shame. Dad, what did you do? I had such distrust for my own family. And then as the months passed, interesting things happened in the criminal procedure. It seemed my family store wasn't really a front for the Cali drug cartel, but New York was investigating the Cali cartel. This was the height of the drug wars, and they needed to prosecute someone. And so my dad and uncle needed to plead guilty, so someone was prosecuted. They were offered a plea bargain. We know that term. The term you don't know, I would venture to say, is trial penalty. So did you know that in this country, we have in the Constitution a right to trial? That right to trial is basically a legal fiction. My father and uncle were told, plead 8 months. And if you do, you can put the matter behind you. And if you don't, you go to trial, you could face 12 years or more if convicted. That kind of risk is not risk most people can afford. And I could ask you, hey, what would you do if you were given that kind of proposition? You can think about it, but I'll answer the question for you. Statistically speaking, you would take the plea. That's pretty much what everyone does. And at that point, and I'll just kind of wrap up the summary here, Brenda, my father and uncle thought they were in for 8-month sentences. But because of missteps by the state, by the justice system, and then a second surprise punishment added to their sentence without us knowing it, deportation, the 8-month sentences turned into a 14-year legal battle that I ended up fighting. So Arthi, who wanted to be a prosecutor, ended up as a teenager becoming her family lawyer.
In this narrative, you show the extremes that can coexist in our country, even within a single home. You were this precocious scholarship kid who snuck out to nightclubs in the city.
Sure did.
And meanwhile, your dad was a workaholic shopkeeper whose shocking arrest turned your family's future upside down. The first time I read your memoir, I was following your story. When I read it again, your dad really struck out to me. Can you tell us more about his story? What was his dream and what happened to him?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so thank you for reading it twice. I really appreciate that. You know, I think my father, and I think his story is far more interesting. He's since passed. The book is in part a eulogy for him. He's a working class migrant in the post-colonial era. Writ large, that's sort of where he falls in the narrative. So what does that mean? He was uprooted as a child at the end of British colonialism. Like millions of people were in that time. Americans are familiar with the story of Mahatma Gandhi and peaceful nonviolent resistance. They're not as familiar as the sort of bloody war that ensued during the end of British colonialism and the hasty departure of the British. So my father was basically uprooted. He was effectively stateless. As a teenager, when he was a teenager, around the age I began defending him in a legal battle, at that age, he had actually set off for Beirut to start becoming a migrant worker. And my dad is, he picked up languages like a sponge. I'd already mentioned he spoke 6. He multiplied very large numbers in his head. He had a photographic memory. He was a brilliant guy. I mean, he's the kind of guy that we know in the context of the tech industry, in the context of Silicon Valley, he's the guy who could easily go into a hedge fund if born into the right life circumstances, or go into the foreign service if born into the right life circumstances. That's not where he was born. He didn't have that luck. And so my father, from a very early age himself, I mean, his first job was to feed his family of 13 when he was a teenager. And from there, he basically hopped around mostly the Middle East and Northern Africa, picking up also French and Arabic in addition to English and the Indian languages he spoke, and working and trying to feed his family. And, when we came to America, I write about this in the book, and this is something that I think a lot of migrants will relate to. A lot of what pushed us to come to America was the combination of curiosity about this place that's kind of like the Harvard of the world, right? Everyone hears about it. Oh my God, what luck might I have there? I mean, if you're hungry, you want to know. And then also it's in part getting away from your family, okay? So part of what the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans and the Sonoran Desert afford you is distance sometimes from an incredibly controlling extended family. No shortage of women in particular have come to the US for that reason. That was actually the specific trigger for my family to come here. And I think that with my father, and you might relate to this, people watching, he didn't actually want to stay here. He thought this country was cold. I mean, literally cold winter. He hadn't felt that before. He thought it was incredibly lonely. He thought it was a harsh environment. He ended up staying because we wanted to stay here. And I think that he hadn't lived in any country longer than here. I mean, America, to the extent that he had a home, and there's an entire generation of people who don't, but to the extent that he had a home, this country was it. All right. This is the longest he'd lived anywhere. And I think so much of his time here was trying to understand, why am I not allowed to just support my family? That was his defining purpose. And the other part, though, that I would say is, oh my God, how do I have this daughter who has such a big mouth and wears such tight and short clothes? And a lot of fear about who this creature, me, was. And I would say that the family crisis, specifically his arrest and then my finally getting involved, I think it helped us to see each other more clearly.
What I love about your memoir is that you masterfully reclaim the immigrant story. As an immigrant myself, I feel like the American publishing industry has this ravenous hunger for the sad immigrant tale. And we've come to expect as audiences very familiar beats: poverty, hard work, gratitude, discrimination, hope. And your memoir, you're saying, this is my story.
No, thank you so much for saying that. I mean, something that really strikes me is that the migrant in mass media, listen, I'm talking newsrooms, I'm talking publishing, absolutely, to some extent film, just because of how few films we produce about migrants, relatively speaking. It's like we're not allowed to have an emotional journey. I mean, it's wild to me, for example, that a person who has survived breast cancer, and I can name examples of people who survived breast cancer, such a person is allowed to have a memoir is allowed to talk about the emotional experience of surviving breast cancer and is not expected to provide a blueprint for oncology payment reform. Okay. The migrant, she can write a memoir about what it felt to see her father locked up, what it felt like to stop going to college, what it felt like literally to run circles around ICE to keep my father in this country. And when I talk about it, I am expected to talk politics and policy and not share my emotional journey. That's the power of basically being villainized, right? When an entire constituency, we're a global constituency, when we've been cast as sort of a negative cancer, like when you're the cancer, you're not allowed to talk about what it feels like. And what I needed to do in this book, what I needed to do for me, frankly, for us, what I needed to do was explain, actually, we have an incredibly complex internal life. It's interesting because, you know, when I was fighting to keep my family in this country, I couldn't go to the halls of Congress and say, hey, I have really conflicted feelings about my uncle. He was wrongfully held for 2.5 years in prison. I also think he's a bully and he threatened to break my face one day. But in my memoir, I could finally be honest. And I think I just needed to be honest for me and for us.
Yeah, it almost seems like it's a betrayal to have ambivalent feelings about your own immigration.
Mm-hmm. And it's funny, right? Because it's kind of like, again, in these policed narratives, it's a betrayal. And the knee-jerk response will be, well, who asked you to come here? Right? That's kind of like, well, if you want to complain about America, get out. And it's actually like, no, you're allowed to have dueling emotions. That's actually human. You're allowed to have made the biggest bet of your life, to not want to go back on it because you made such a big bet, and to feel incredibly conflicted about that bet. That's life, but we're not allowed to talk about it.
Tell us what it was like to confront the judge who sentenced your dad.
It's so interesting that, and you used the word confront before. Yeah. And, you know, it's interesting, Brenda, because I don't think I was confronting. And just to give some context, when my family's legal case went off the rails, through things that I describe in my memoir, Here We Are, I decided as a teenager, I was going to write directly to the judge who was overseeing the case. Now, that doesn't typically happen. And even more irregular is the judge actually wrote back to me. And we had an exchange. And basically in my pen pal, he called it pen pal relationship with him, we fixed things up and finally got my uncle released from prison. Only then he was taken surprise for deportation. We didn't know. Years and years later, I mean, you can't make this stuff up. Like, life is wild. Years and years later, I'm an NPR correspondent. I get a LinkedIn message. It's an invitation to connect with the jailer who ran Rikers Island. I accept. And like, the thing is, I don't know about you, like, I love weird, okay? Like, the weirder, the better is kind of how I am about a lot of things. So anyway, he and I connect. He suggests we meet up in New York for a coffee. We have a mutual friend in common. And I go and I meet him. And he asks me a little bit about my life and why I seem to know so much and have interest in criminal justice. And I'm like, oh, my dad was a prisoner at Rikers. He wasn't expecting that. He was like, oh, who was the judge? I'm like, oh, this guy, Joel Blumenfeld. He was not expecting that. Turns out they're best friends. He brokers a reunion. So Brenda, what you're calling a confrontation, I actually thought was a reunion with this judge. And here's what's really hard. And this is the difference between memoir and journalism. When I went to the judge, he told me first words out of his mouth, and I recount it in my book, first words out of his mouth: your father and uncle should never have taken that guilty plea. What a mistake. And here's the thing. When you're a journalist, and you know this, Brenda, when you're a journalist and you hear a miscarriage of justice or the little guy getting pulverized by the machine, you know it's a good story. Your curiosity piques. You want more details. There's this kind of broken incentive structure in what we do, in that the worse it is, the better the story. When you're a daughter, it doesn't feel that way. So when he told me that, when the judge told me about that being a miscalculation on our parts, we didn't know how to play, frankly, the poker hand that is the justice system. I remember wanting to vomit, and I remember wanting to get the hell out of his office. And it was actually only more than a year later I had the wherewithal to go back to him and seek an interview to talk about it. That interview, by the way, was in his home. He invited me in his home to talk with him. And I'd say, Brenda, my lesson from that experience with my father's judge, which happened, again, started when I was a teenager, we have very formative experiences when we're young. And this is actually something I try to talk with students about, is that it's not like when you become an adult, you figure it out. It's that when you're young, you have transformative experiences that give you an eye into your leadership. And what I came to understand about my own leadership is I have a capacity to reach powerful people that the people I love could never talk to. And I have a capacity to be a bridge and sometimes share a story or ask hard questions. And so I think that to some extent, the experience I had with the judge, which again, I don't believe was a confrontation, I think it gave me an insight into part of what my mission is in this world.
Tell us about your journey from organizer to journalist.
Yeah, I mean, so part of the story we're skipping over, but it's in the book, is I basically, when I was fighting my father's case, the September 11th attacks happened. I'm from New York City. I grew up in New York City. My brother worked in the towers. It was a terrifying time. And then after that, the country changed. And we as immigrants, it's funny, a Black girlfriend of mine said this. She's like, 9/11 is when your brown brothers became Black. And I was like, kind of, I know what you mean, the rounding up, the incarceration. I started a nonprofit by accident to start helping people who, like my father, were being rounded up and kicked out. And I built it, I worked on it. And anyone who started a company, a nonprofit, whether it's whatever your startup is, that it takes wisdom to build something. And, younger Arthi, she didn't have the wisdom she needed. In part, the odds were just insane, it was a David and Goliath fight. But I worked on that for several years. I've worked personally with more than 1,000 people who've unfortunately been deported from this country. I'm still in touch with a few of them. And at the end of that, what became the end of that for me, I just burned out. Burn out. But burnout is a tricky term because what does it really mean? I think it's kind of like, just to give it a bit of surgical precision, it's that you lack the wisdom or resources to find a path for growth. And so that's what happened to me. And it's interesting because so many people come into journalism because it feels like the way that you're going to fight the good fight. And for me, I'm going to be frank, for me, journalism felt like a much more safe and tangible and clearly respectable position to hold. It was a way for me to fix my credit score. I did one of the most practical things I've ever done in my life, which is that the way I joined the technology beat was actually, I noticed that there was so much demand in newsrooms for tech journalism. This is before 2016, at the sort of the really acceleration of the smartphone era. And I noticed if I plant myself in Silicon Valley and I report, I basically am going to guarantee myself a very good job very quickly. And that's pretty much what happened. And so, you
made a bet.
I made a bet. I made a bet and the bet paid off. And, in a very short period of time, within 3 or 4 years of becoming a journalist, I became NPR's leading voice in Silicon Valley. I mean, the bet paid off quickly.
Can you tell us about, how you got into that beat in terms of convincing editors that this was a thing you wanted to do and you were the right person to do it? And then, if you could tell us some of the biggest scoops of your career, I think that would be fun as well.
Sure. Yeah. So, I'm going to actually fold your questions in together a little bit because they're related to each other.
You left your job as a beat reporter after your memoir was published. What has that transition been like for you? Specifically, what doors has this memoir opened for you? What does this mean for the next stage of your career? And I wonder how you're combining your activism with your journalism.
Absolutely. That's a great question. I'm in final negotiations for a new thing I'm doing, so I can't even, it's like I'm dying to tell you what it is. And I can't specify what the new thing is. Basically, I got a new thing. You're going to hear about it very soon. What I would say that the memoir did for me is the memoir helped me really align with my values. So, what is your core skill set? You ask yourself, what's your skill set? Turns out my skill set, whether I'm a kid writing to the judge about her dad or an advocate in New York City prisons or a journalist in Silicon Valley, my core skill set is research, the ability to find the relevant people and put a story together. Okay, I've got this skill set. The memoir, it helped me see how intrigued I am by power, how much I want to understand power, how much I think that people who are fighting for justice need to understand power far more than we do. And so I guess the little hint I'll give is that the next big heavy lift I'm doing, in it, I've basically managed to convert power into my new beat.
That's great. One of my really good friends who's also an activist, Lewis Wallace, talks about the need for us to take shifts in power. And that has really reframed the way that I think about power. I think we're ready to start opening it up to audience questions, unless you want to talk about something that I didn't ask you.
No, let's take questions. Yeah.
All right. Okay, from Jennifer. Hi, Arthi. Thank you for sharing your story. It couldn't have been easy reflecting on so many years. I'm so sorry for your loss. If I can ask a question, what would you want to say to your younger self?
Oh, what a great question, Jennifer. And I'll add this. When you write a book, other authors will tell you, you'll get responses you never expected. So when I was writing my book, I'll say, for example, and I can show you, here's the paperback now. I've got in my hands. When I was writing Here We Are, I just never cried so much in my entire life. I mean, it was ugly, ugly crying, very, very emotional. And what I did not realize was that my tearful, what I thought was kind of a eulogy for what my family had experienced, was actually, to a lot of young people, an incredibly empowering coming of age story about a girl who took matters into her own hands when the adults couldn't figure it out for themselves. So I'm really happy about that response. I've been talking to students so much since the publishing of Here We Are. And what I would say to younger Arthi, it's kind of a couple of things. The first thing I would say is, girl, other people have been through what you've been through. So go and find yourself some mentors, okay? Get yourself some mentors. It's okay. You don't need to know it all. Go find people you can confide in about what scares you. Go find people who their only dog in the fight is seeing you survive, and they're doing things you respect, and seek out their mentorship. The other thing I would say to young Arthi, let's not kid ourselves. The other thing I would say to her is, there's a word I've been thinking about a lot lately. I'm going to share it with you, is duality. In writing my memoir, I was resolving two very conflicted feelings. The one was the absolute rage I feel toward my country for how it destroyed a good man's life, my father, and frankly took away my childhood, okay? I grew up in an anxiety attack because of what was going on that lasted for more than a decade. The other feeling I have about this country is deep gratitude. In the parts of the world where my family comes from, a girl with a mouth on her like mine gets that mouth broken, okay? We all know it. We know the places I'm talking about. We know the families I'm talking about. And here, it was rewarded with full scholarships to great schools, to a six-figure salary in journalism incredibly early on in the journey, to writing a book. I mean, I had to write an entire book for this. I hope it's easier for other people. What I had to basically really internalize and hold is just the fact of duality. That at this point, if you want to be clear, you can't choose between your rage and your gratitude. You have to figure out how to hold them together. And if you have the gift of searingly indicting what's broken, hats off to you and do it. But then please also use that gift to celebrate what works and vice versa.
I love that you're talking about duality. It's something that I've been thinking about, you know, as a journalist who is addicted to that 24-hour news cycle, that horse race. Mm-hmm. I have found that in the last couple of months, I'm more attracted to books, to longer form articles, to pieces of journalism and nonfiction that allow us to have that duality and that complexity of thought that aren't primed for a quick reaction.
Absolutely. You know, anything to slow it down. We need to slow it down.
But that's so contrary to, you know, especially those of us who work in tech, we're always talking about, let's get rid of the friction. Let's go faster, faster, faster.
Everybody, you know, in newsrooms, it's report a story, speak to your sources, write the post, get on air, and read Twitter all at the same time. I mean, like, you know, we're designing a world where we're supposed to be distracted with our attention everywhere. My process for my book is the most, it's the biggest accomplishment of my creative, personal, and professional life. Okay. I don't yet have human babies. I think of the book of Here We Are as my first baby. Okay, I'm very proud of it. How did I write it? I went into basically total seclusion for 6 months. I had quiet. I shut off my phone. I was with myself and I heard the things inside come out. And I would recommend a version of that to pretty much everyone.
So yeah, it really takes intentionality to figure out these feelings. And I'm wondering, you know, now that you've had this cathartic, I would say almost healing experience of putting this trauma, this pain in a book, does part of you feel like, okay, I've put it down now. I don't have to remember it as much because it's here if I ever want to revisit it?
I think the way I feel about I have no idea. Like I have, you know, I can tell you that like by this point in my book tour, like I'm going to be really excited to stop talking about myself. So if that's what you mean, like, yeah, we definitely got that. I'm really happy I wrote my family story, a version of my family story specifically for the children in my family. I'm blessed to have 2 beautiful nephews and 1 niece and an extended family. And I want every little Shahani to pick up Here We Are, to read what their grandfather went through and their grandmother, my mother, who we haven't spoken about so much in this conversation, who really made it, she was the backbone in pulling off migration for us. I want them to read about their grandparents' experience and not do that thing that so many 2nd and 3rd generation immigrants unfortunately do, which is throw their own family's memory under the bus because they're eager to claim some sort of self-made model minority narrative. Okay. So in some ways, I think about my literary contribution as being a way to keep my family straight for the future generations.
And you, of course, are a creative person. You're a writer, you're a radio producer, but you know what your parents did, imagining this life that they had never seen before, that is a radically creative act.
It is. No, it really is. And, you know, I think that I think about it like when they were my age, they were taking 3 little kids across an ocean to start a new life as working class people. You know, I think that what I did, it definitely took discipline and concentration. The risks they took, I don't know that I would have the appetite for those risks. But the fact is, and it's clear in how I write about it, and maybe you would feel this in your own heart about your parents, I admire them for it. I deeply admire them for it. So yes, we talk about migration as though it is perpetrated by some villain, but to me, it's the most heroic act of one's life.
I'm curious if any of your colleagues, either at NPR or, you know, your colleagues who also were on the tech beat with you in other organizations, if they were surprised that you had this story all along.
Yeah.
Can you tell me, what have they said to you?
Because we have so many racialized stereotypes, right? You don't think that the model minority is going to have a Rikers Island story, you know? And a lot of the model minority, I'm sorry, I'm keep doing this. A lot of the model minorities who do don't share them, okay? So yeah, people were really surprised. People had no idea that, you know, that the tech lady was so familiar with America's prison system. I think, frankly, it has something to do with also the gap between what actual Americans experience and what newsrooms cover. I mean, I consider myself a very rigorous journalist, okay? And what I observe in newsrooms is a bias towards what you know. And this is actually part of the challenge we're facing in having trust among audiences. It's not just that you have a pathologically lying president, lying, as we now are comfortable saying, who keeps spewing out what is incorrect and calling us fake news. It's not just that. It's that our readers, our audiences, often look at the things we cover and the way we cover people and are turned off because there is an elitism there, right? And so I think that to some extent, the surprise that some of my colleagues experienced within NPR and in the broader journalistic community has to do with the way that we simply shut out the actual stories of people who have working class backgrounds and people of color, right? And this is something that's so interesting to me because in journalism, I remember when I stepped into it, the year is 2010, I felt like I came into journalism with PhD level knowledge of immigration enforcement and criminal justice. And I felt I needed to hide that knowledge and pick up something totally new to prove that I fit. I was not in a newsroom environment where an editor got to know me and asked, hey, what are you expert in? And empowered me to run with that. Because that expertise was seen as a conflict of interest at that time. Now, mind you, you could have worked at Goldman Sachs and then get a show on CNN, as another journalist did. So when the conflict of interest is elite, it's considered a qualification. When it's working class, it's considered a conflict of interest, right?
Oh,
and so I think that in the media reckoning that we're having right now, we really have to reconsider, when is something a qualification? When does it knock you out? And can we please get rid of this notion of objectivity and just understand that our journey is to be as fair as we can. And being fair means you have to be self-aware of your own biases. We are human. There's no way you're objective. Sorry.
Right. And the rigor is in the method. That's what journalism is. It's how we collect and verify information. And journalism, you don't do it by yourself. That's why you have colleagues and an editor who's checking your biases.
Absolutely.
Did you ever hear something being framed in a way about immigration or criminal justice in the other side of the newsroom and just want to run and correct it and you chose not to? Or, the fact that you were in Silicon Valley, did it help to have that distance?
I do keep my ear very wide, really perched, I think, particularly for how the reporting around ICE has unfolded. And I think that basically...
Can I admit something?
Yes.
I didn't know that there was a time before ICE, before I read your book.
Oh, see, and thank you for admitting it. Thank you for admitting. So, ICE was created after the September 11th attacks. It was basically, it's an agency that technically it's by and large a kind of civil enforcement agency. So it's not supposed to have in many of its functions the power of police, but literally soon after their formation, they just started donning the gear. They just put on police gear and they got themselves some jackets and they branded themselves in a certain way that just totally captured the narrative. And so, part of what really I have heard about and concerns me in newsrooms, or that I've watched in newsrooms, is people reporting on this agency without understanding the context in which it was created, and also very specifically not understanding the difference between criminal and civil enforcement. And so really mixing legal regimes that shouldn't be mixed and allowing a lot of abuse to occur in the process.
Okay, we have some audience questions. Hi, Arthi. Thanks so much. Are there any books? This is from Mac. Are there any books that you're reading that you'd recommend for us?
Oh, yeah. Actually, one that I'm reading right now, it's called Caste, and it's by...
Oh, sorry. This is from Farah.
Farah, thank you so much, Farah, for your question. There's a book I'm reading right now. It's called Caste by Isabel Wilkerson. And it's just really fascinating. It's very heralded. Maybe you've heard of it already. But it's basically, in America, we use the word race and racism. And Wilkerson's history and investigation and documentation is to basically make the point that America has a caste system, what we call racism and race. It's caste, and we've seen it in other countries. And she basically undertakes a sort of historical and comparative analysis that I think increasingly for us who are trying to understand this country, the more we can apply the terms that we use abroad, like regime, things like that, will help to see ourselves more clearly. So I would highly recommend Caste as a book that you should pick up.
Mm-hmm. Do we have more audience questions for us? Let's see. All right. Well, okay, we don't have any more questions, but okay. I guess what I want to ask you is, this memoir is so, it's you kind of taking a stand in journalism and like reclaiming your own story and framing it within the narratives that we honestly, as journalists, we fabricate. What have the conversations that you've had with newsmakers been like after the publication of your memoir?
Oh, and so what do you mean? I just want to understand a little bit what you mean.
Because, many of your colleagues, myself included, when I worked in a newsroom, like we are complicit in making these very narratives that you are saying are incorrect. And, we do that on a daily basis. It's so hard to step out of that daily churn and say like, ooh, actually, like the way that we're framing this question is incorrect.
I'd say there's sort of two responses that make me feel very hopeful. One is, I had from no shortage of editors and leaders at our own newsroom at NPR, really wonderful feedback. People who felt that, for some, they also fully admitted they hadn't realized or they had forgotten the historical context that gave birth to ICE. They had forgotten about the war on drug era laws during the Clinton administration that gave birth to the mass deportation system we're now seeing. And so journalistically, they just appreciated, oh, this is a good book about this thing. And then also, obviously, when you do broadcast, when you're at NPR, when you do audio storytelling, you really work to deliver emotion. And so, I actually think that my radio training, learning to write scripts for radio, it really helped me with simple prose. With getting to the feelings around things, with bringing people through an emotional journey. So I think that I got, I felt very seen and frankly affirmed in the process of this memoir. The other response, Brenda, that I've gotten that I find fascinating is no shortage of colleagues at NPR and other newsrooms reaching out to me because they've got a story in them they're burning to share. And they didn't feel like they had permission to do it. They weren't sure it would look professional. When you're a journalist, you are afraid sometimes of being called an activist. And I notice that people, at this point, I just don't really worry what people call me, because I think that what you call me reflects more sort of where you're coming from than any objective difference in what I'm doing. So I'm not too concerned about the labels at this point. But, it's been interesting to me to spend a lot of one-on-one time with people who are reporting on the president, on Congress, on the Black Lives Matter movement, on the America becoming a minority majority country, the demographic changes, the culture wars. In newsrooms throughout this country, people who have reached out because they care, because they've got a personal story. And when you're a journalist, you have a megaphone, you have a platform, and you want to know if you have permission to use it to talk about what's actually inside your own background. And so what I would really hope that I've done in my book is not just help to give voice to the migrant experience in this country, but help to give permission to journalists. Go ahead and share your story. It's okay. And all your training and reporting is just going to make it a better story.
I strongly believe that the ability and the platform to tell our own stories is a form of power, the most important form of power, I would say. And with organizations that do podcasting like NPR, I've noticed that there's a real boon in history podcasts, that they're becoming increasingly popular.
Oh, yeah.
NPR has Throughline, which is an
Throughline
excellent
is the best. Oh my
Very
God,
good.
I love Throughline. It's, you know, in addition to reading Wilkerson's book, I would just say that if you're looking for a great listen to NPR's Throughline. I mean, it is every week giving you some deep dive so that you understand current events through a historical lens. I mean, it's wonderful work.
And it's hard to give that context in a 3-minute radio piece. And sometimes your editor calls and says, actually, shave 30 minutes off. And you're like, ah.
Yeah, 30 seconds. Exactly. Yeah.
I think we have a couple more audience questions.
Sure.
From John. What's the best way to pick up a copy of your book? I actually know this one. Do you want to say it or shall I?
Sure. Well, I'll just hold it right here. And I'll say, so the book is Here We Are. And if you'd like an autographed copy of it, the best way to pick it up is go to my website to order it. So my website would just be my first name, Arthi, and my last name, Shahani, arthishahani.com. So you can go to my website and you can just from there order your autographed copy. You would be ordering that way through an independent bookstore. So it's arthishahani.com to order Here We Are. And besides that, it's sold everywhere. So really wherever you want. Thank you for asking.
I think we have one more. From Melissa. Hi, Arthi. Thank you so much for your story. It is really inspiring for the fact that it's the truth for a lot of families in the past and now. What are some encouraging words or advice that you would give to someone going through the same situation?
Oh, thank you for asking that. You know, part of what concerned me in writing this book is that as much as my family experienced, the fact is we were able to get green cards through a sibling petition in a handful of years. The thing that took a handful of years would today take 24, 25 years, right? So we're often told, hey, go stand online. And then you know there's not actually a line to stand on. It is incredibly hard for people who are trying to make it right now. And what I would say about the struggle is that a lot of people want you here, okay? So don't just look at what's trending on Twitter. Don't just look at what the headlines are. Look around you, and you will see that we live in a country where even in districts that, for example, voted for President Trump, you have immigrant-owned restaurants that are the most popular places to eat. Okay, I've actually looked this up. I've actually reported this. So the fact is, you are wanted here. You have to decide if you want to fight to stay, because yes, it is a fight, but don't be gaslighted into thinking otherwise.
Arthi, thank you so much for sharing your time and your story with us.
Thank
Folks,
you.
Arthi's memoir, Here We Are, American Dreams, American Nightmares, has just been released in paperback. Again, you can get an autographed copy on her website, arthishahani.com, so you can see the two different
We can hold them together.
There we go.
How different they look.
Arthi, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much.